Star Wars The Grey War, Chapter 12 by Nathan Brown.
12. There is no dark side, nor light side, there is only the Force. I will do what I must to keep the balance, as the balance is what keeps me together. There is no good without evil, nor evil without good. Evil must not be allowed to flourish and good must not be allowed to make us inhuman. There is passion, yet peace, serenity, yet emotion, chaos, yet order. I am the wielder of the flame, the protector of balance. I am not afraid of emotions nor am I a slave to them. I am the key, emperor of the flame, soldier of balance. I am a guardian of the galaxy and all its inhabitants. I am a Grey Jedi. Kinsa read these words with fevered excitement. There were some things she disagreed with in this doctrine, yet she couldn't deny the almost magical pull she felt towards it. So many of these words seemed as if they had been copied right from her mind, as if she had written them herself. She had come across the code of the Grey Jedi while she was flying in her ship through hyperspace. After her disappointing talk with Master Liftling, she had started searching the net for other sects of the Jedi, historic variations that held to the basic doctrines of the Jedi, but had been condemned by the Council for their different beliefs. Her idea was that if she could find and contact these groups the next time she found herself in a similar situation, with young, Force-sensitive beings the Jedi wouldn't accept, she could send them there to be raised and trained. Or at the very least that's the reason she told herself she was doing it. A part of her she ignored insisted she was doing it for herself, and that it was dangerous. As she dug deeper and deeper, always unsatisfied with what she found herself getting further away from the basic tenets of the Jedi. As she was getting closer to what she believed, she was shocked, and a bit worried, at how close she was coming to the doctrines of groups she had always considered followers of the dark side. The Ember of Val, the Night Sisters, the Pit, the Doomed and other organizations heavily influenced by the dark side that she'd learned about during her time as a Jedi. Then, after a long and revealing search, she had come across this. The Grey Jedi were apparently a faction within the Jedi Order that existed a couple of 100 years before the Battle of Ruusan. They had been a part of the Order but had acted somewhat independently of the Jedi Council, using Force powers that were considered dark side and using other methods that were condemned by the Jedi Council. No matter how hard she looked, Kinsa couldn't find any conclusive information on what had happened to them. There were conflicting reports, some which said they'd left or were forced to leave the Order and had formed their own organization. She'd read others that claimed they still existed within the Jedi but had just become less vocal as pressure from the Jedi Council had increased. Both possibilities seemed unlikely to Kinsa. If they had left the Jedi Order, then what had happened to them? And why did none of the Masters talk about them, even as a cautionary tale? The Jedi had busts of the Fallen, all the Jedi Masters who had abandoned the Order, in the middle of the archives, so it made no sense that she wouldn't have heard anything about this group. And if they had just stayed silent for hundreds of years within the Jedi Order, they definitely would have resurfaced during this time, with all the young knights speaking out against the Council so freely. Kinsa just wanted to know what had happened to this group of Grey Jedi, whose words alone made her feel more at home and accepted than she felt with the Jedi. If she could find them, she thought she could work out the confusing mess going around in her spirit, as well as find a place for children the Jedi wouldn't accept. If she had someone to talk to and to guide her through, she knew she would be alright. The closest thing she had to that now was Master Sifu, and she still wasn't completely comfortable working through her doubts with a council member, even if he had expressed similar doubts. Still, she couldn't very well ask around to see if anyone had heard about the Grey Jedi. If it got back to Master Liftling that she was interested in them, she would no doubt be pulled from the field. She continued to search the net for any word on what had happened to them. There had to be something. Scene change. So are you ready to put that new toy of yours to a true test? Darth Cognews said playfully, tossing her lightsaber in the air, catching it. Naman had been noticing a change in Darth Cognews over the last couple of months since his trip to Voras. She had always been nicer than he would expect a master to be, especially a Sith master, but she had become even more friendly as time went on. It felt like they were comrades working together, equals instead of master and apprentice. He whirled around and pulled his sword from its scabbard where it was strapped on his back. He looked at it for a moment, admiring it. He had chosen the name Force Eater, or, in ancient Sith language, Kyasik Darafun, after its ability to suck the Force from any room it was in or person it was around, and its ability to absorb Force lightning. He did a few practice swings for show. "This should be fun," he said. Darth Cognews smiled, then launched her lightsaber quickly at him. He ducked under the spinning blur and shot a small amount of lightning at her in response. Cognews jumped up, cartwheeling over the stream lightning that passed centimeters under her head. As she was in the air, she recalled her weapon from behind Naman, forcing him to duck to avoid it again. As she grabbed a hold of it, she pressed the secondary activation and held it like a regular Shoto. She landed in a crouch before him and sliced at his feet with her right hand. Naman lifted his leg up, avoiding Cognews' strike and bringing his knee up under her chin in the same move. She fell backwards into a roll and came quickly to her feet, facing him again in a crouch. He dashed forward, bringing his sword up and swinging it down, aiming for her head. She easily sidestepped the blow and pushed the offensive before Naman could build his momentum and force Darth Cognews into a defensive stance. He retreated hurriedly, using all he had in an attempt to match her astonishing speed. This was his weapon's one weakness. With its weight, it was hard for him to match the speed of a lightsaber in the hands of a trained practitioner, and it was nearly impossible for him to keep up with Cognews' whirling sabers. Even compensating with the Force, he knew it couldn't last for very long. Darth Cognews was continually striking with both her weapons at the same time, forcing him to avoid one saber and block the other. He wasn't very good at moving and dodging like this. Darth Cognews finally made a mistake. She came in with both sabers at the same time, both aimed for his hip. He was able to take a step back and bring his sword swinging from right to left to block her attacks. Because of the weight of the sword and his strength, he was able to force both her arms out, exposing her body. He quickly brought his sword back, retracing its path, aiming for her vulnerable torso. Instead of trying to block his attack, Darth Cognews just tilted to the left and dropped to the floor, falling under his blade. She wrapped her lithe legs around his thick ankle and twisted her body, tripping him up and making him pitch forward. He quickly dropped his sword and brought his hands up to brace his fall. By the time he scrambled to his feet, she was already pushing her attack. He used the Force to grab his sword and immediately had to lean back to avoid the humming blade aimed for his neck. He brought his sword up to block the other stab aimed for his chest. He kicked at her legs, hoping to knock her off balance, but she simply jumped up to avoid his foot. As she landed, Naman straightened himself and reached towards her, dropping his sword to the ground again and grabbing her wrists in his durasteel grasp. He yanked her arms apart, trying to keep her lightsabers far from him. He spread her arms out and lifted her up, letting her feet dangle. He heard her quiet grunt of pain as he overextended her arms. He wasn't actually sure what he would do with her now that he had her in this position. Before he could decide, Darth Cognews swung her legs back and then brought them up and kicked him in the face with both feet. Naman felt his nose crunch and he roared in pain. He immediately let go of Cognews' wrist and stumbled back, pressing his hand to his face, trying to catch the flowing blood. Darth Cognews dashed forward with her lightsabers extended and held them up to his neck. "Done much?" she said simply before extinguishing her lightsabers and placing them back on her high. Hey, that was impressive, she told him as she sat down on the training room floor and crossed her legs. She motioned for him to do the same. I didn't expect that move. It certainly caught me off guard. However, it's important not to lose your weapon in battle, certainly not when you don't have a concrete plan. Nama nodded, still holding his head in his hands, viewing her through his fingers. He hadn't meant to let go of his sword. He had gotten flustered, knowing he couldn't keep up his defense much longer, and had reacted without thinking. It's important that you find a way to compensate for the weight of the blade on defense. Especially, she said with a smile, if you're going to succeed on your next mission. Naman perked up. It had been months since he was sent to Voras. He enjoyed the training with Darth Cognus and the valuable lessons he learned, but he missed the thrill of true adventure. He missed the tight, nervous feeling that came from being in real danger. He straight-eyed silent, waiting excitedly for her to give him the mission. There is a large cult on Jagutta calling themselves the Dead Galaxy. They are actually an alliance of multiple cults, united under a human leader. I've been keeping an eye on them for many years and they are rapidly becoming a serious problem. They are quietly and quickly growing in number, adding other cults to their ranks, and finding new members. If they continue at this pace, they could eventually challenge the Jedi. Their leader, Greif, holds martial strength above all else. When he first became the leader, he issued a challenge to all his members, that if any one of them could defeat him in a duel, they would assume the mantle of leadership. The challenge was issued over 5 years ago and, though he has been challenged many times, has never been defeated. We need to stop this cult before it grows too large. You, must push them into a war they cannot hope to win. You will travel to Jagutta and challenge their leader in single combat. Once you defeat him, you will take lead of the cult and force them into a war against the Jedi. Decree a challenge to the Jedi. Once you have full control of the cult, the Jedi will be forced to respond and the Dark Galaxy will be destroyed. Naman had to control his body to keep it from trembling. This was way more than anything he could hope for in a mission. He took a few calming breaths and focused on Darth Cognus as she continued talking. Besides just defeating a dangerous group of Darksiders, this will also keep the young Jedi Knights from becoming too restless. I thought I'd done enough to discourage this sudden burst of Jedi activity, but I was wrong, she said, almost seeming to talk to herself. My ears in the temple tell me that the younger knights continued to talk about seceding from the Jedi and creating their own order, the legendary Guardians, as they apparently plan to call themselves. This cult will be destroyed, but the common enemy will keep the Jedi together, and it will give the disillusioned knights a war to rally around and reminisce about. Naman was still excited for this mission and he understood how this would keep the Jedi together, but he was confused why they would want to. Why do we need the Jedi to be together? He asked her after trying and failing to figure it out for himself. Wouldn't it be better to have them fractured, to divide and conquer? Darth Cognus responded patiently. While there would be some benefits to splitting the Jedi into fractions, the pros are heavily outweighed by the cons. These legendary guardians would spread out, learn and experience. They would grow stronger as they tested themselves against the galaxy. No doubt they would visit planets where the Jedi had never been before, finding new challenges and new members. Besides simply getting stronger, they would be on a safe arc for the dark side. The Jedi Order now pretends to care about eradicating all traces of what they see as the Dark Force, but it is a lie. In truth, they feel they have done enough by supposedly whipping out the Sith. As long as the influence of what they call the dark side stays out of sight, the majority of them are more than happy to pretend it doesn't exist. It would not be so with these younger, more wild Jedi. They would follow up on every rumor and whisper and eventually they would find us before we were ready. We need to keep to ourselves. keeping the Jedi distracted, making them feel like they're doing something while we work towards their destruction. Naaman was amazed at his master's planning mind, and he was reminded again how much he still had to learn. He nodded to signify he understood her point. He was anxious to get started on his new mission. Take care to remember your true goal, she warned him before he could get up, her tone becoming dry and serious. Being a master over one being can be intoxicating. Being ruler over thousands of people could easily become overwhelming. Remember who you are. You're not the leader of a one-in-a-million cult. You're the heir to the legacy of Darth Bane, the true Sith line. She finished her warning and rose to her feet, signifying it was time for him to leave. Naaman jumped to his feet and quickly headed for the stairs, still filled with excitement at his new mission. If it hadn't been for her harsh tone, Naaman would have dismissed his master's warning completely. He wasn't afraid that he would be tempted to leave his apprenticeship to be the leader of some cult he was being sent to crush. As he reached the door, it dawned on him why she had given the warning at all. Darth Millennial, her last apprentice. She hadn't told him much about the man, but he knew he had ran from her. He understood now why her voice had gotten so cold when she had warned him about it. She was still hurt from losing her last apprentice and was afraid that Naaman would abandon her as well. He found it interesting that for all her cruelty and power, she still had spots of vulnerability. He didn't see the point of leading a cult, though. No one would be there to teach him, and all the knowledge his predecessors had collected would be lost to him. He would be starting from scratch without anyone to guide him. Naaman knew his limitations, and he knew he wasn't ready to step out on his own. The scope of her planning alone proved this. Naaman came to a sudden stop and turned back to face his master. "I will remain loyal to the Sith," he assured her, giving a quick bow. Cognews turned to face him and gave him a curt nod. "You will find all the information I could gather about the cults, their history and their leaders on a datapad in your room. Be sure to read it thoroughly, and I would suggest you try to find additional information. You should leave soon, but there isn't much of a rush for this mission. One last thing. Most of these cults apparently have a large amount of wealth. It would be good for you to siphon their credits out before you flee. You should start accumulating your own wealth." She turned her back to him again and started going through her attack sequences. Naaman stood and watched her for a moment before stepping away from her and continuing his run up the stairs, heading for his room. She'd said there was no rush to leave, but Naaman wanted to start as soon as possible, and he had a lot of research to do. Scene change. Cognews heard her apprentice's heavy footfalls as he bounded up the stairs. Despite her earlier concerns, she felt good about her decision to send Naaman to deal with the cult. She had originally been nervous about making her apprentice the leader of a cult. She wasn't sure she had been with him long enough to trust him not to stray. She had even considered doing the mission herself, but knew that wasn't an option at this time. She couldn't leave Naaman alone with nothing to do so early on in his training. Besides, there were some things she had to take care of. Scene change. Kinza gritted her teeth, working to keep her mouth shut and trying her hardest to keep from yelling what was in her head at Master Farrell as he gave her orders. Ever since her research on the Grey Jedi, she had been having trouble with respecting or taking orders from the leaders of the Jedi. This was the man who had accepted her into the ranks of the Shadows, she told herself. She shouldn't be angry with him. Truthfully, she knew she wasn't angry with him, but rather with what he represented to her. He was the only Jedi leader she had come into contact with since reading about the Grey Jedi, and so all her frustrations were being aimed towards him even though he didn't deserve it. Once Kinza rationalized what was happening in her head, she was able to push her stupid, artificial anger aside. It was time to focus on the mission she was receiving. A group of them on the moon of Bonesea. They're stirring up trouble and I need you to go and investigate. I'm not sure what the threat is, so if you feel you can't deal with it alone, call for backup. Even though she had come to momentary peace, Kinsa almost scoffed. She certainly wouldn't be calling any other Jedi for backup. If she did, it would probably take months before they got to her. Scene change. A few days later, Naman stepped onto the small, private dock attached to their estate. He stared longingly at Talon, his Maz Te'ar's personal ship. He'd never been inside of it, but just from the outside, it looked amazingly luxurious. Based on the size, he wasn't sure he would be comfortable in the ship, but anything would be better than the ship he had to use. It was an old, clunky transport ship from before the war. Darth Cognus had added armor plating to it and a new hyperdrive, but it still looked ugly and handled terribly. It was beat up, the paint was fading and the hull was riddled with dents and burns. He realized the point of the ship was to be inconspicuous, but he still hated flying around in that piece of space junk. He gave a resigned sigh and walked up the open ramp onto the ship. He put his disappointment about the ship out of his mind. He needed to focus on his coming mission. Scene change. Kinsa felt sick. This entire moon, the air, the smell, the ground, it all created a deep pit in the middle of her stomach. She was certain she was about to throw up, and yet she felt like she was starving at the same time. There had been talk of dark side sorcerers corrupting this moon, and it seemed clear the rumors were not unfounded. She had to stand, lean really, against the small hut for a few minutes, letting the light side flow from within her until she felt better. She rechecked her equipment to make sure she had everything before she continued. After getting her mission, Kinsa had spoken to a couple of the locals to gather more information. The sorcerers were apparently 3 females in the middle of the desert, surviving off meager of meals and communing with the Force. It was these locals who had sent the reports to Coruscant. She slung her pack, full of rations, water and a thermal sleeping bag onto her back and trotted off into the desert. She hoped she could find them before the cold night fell. Scene change. Cognus stared lovingly at her ship. Besides certain scrolls and holocrons, Raven was without a doubt her most precious possession. She walked up the thin ramp, the inside just as beautiful and sleek as the outside. She entered her cockpit and sat into the captain's chair that seemed to just conform to her body. She set a course for Ruusan, the site of the battle of the last war between the Sith and the Jedi's apparent success and the true Sith's greatest victory. Before he had left, Darth Bane had taken the journal of Lord Quartus, a headmaster at the old Sith Academy. The journal was chock full of secrets he had been hoarding from the rest of the Brotherhood of Darkness. One of the secrets was about a holocron from an ancient Sith that Quartus had managed to collect. Apparently, with the war raging around him, he hadn't had the time or privacy to explore it. Choosing to take it with him to Ruusan, he'd hid it from the other Sith Lords, planning to recover it after the war. He had drawn a confusing map with a coded language that Darth Cognus had just recently taken the time to decipher. With map in hand, she was dead to Ruusan to collect the holocron. Sending Naman after it had been an option, but she thought he would enjoy the other mission more. And, besides, she trusted her apprentice, but she wasn't sure he wouldn't attempt to explore the holocron's secrets before delivering it to her.